red and blue police lights slicing through darkness, a front door slamming hard enough to rattle glass, a baby sleeping in a crib, moonlight across his face, a hand gripping a crayon, dragging across paper, a single torn shoe left on a wooden porch. 1984, a babysitter gone in under an hour. No signs of a struggle. The only person who saw anything couldn't talk because he was 3, but he could draw. And 20 years later, that drawing blew the case wide open. Brookdale wasn't the kind of place you worried about locking your doors at night. A town of just under 4,000 people. It sat between cornfields and quiet county roads. Neighbors knew each other's names, their kids, and their routines. The most scandalous news usually came from the high school football team's losing streak. Lisa Crane had grown up here, 17 years old. With long brown hair she usually wore in a ponytail. She was the kind of teenager parents trusted without hesitation. She was an honor roll student, part of the school's volunteer tutoring program, and known for being punctual to a fault. Babysitting was her main after-school job. She did it not just for extra cash, but to save for her dream of studying early childhood education. That summer, she babysat regularly for Jim and Carol Harper, who lived in a 2-story brick house on Hawthorne Drive. Their son, Daniel, was 3 years old, curious, energetic, and prone to climbing anything in sight. Lisa knew how to keep him entertained, how to coax him into bedtime without a fight, and how to make him laugh. Saturday, August 11th, 1984, the Harpers were invited to a dinner party at the Brookdale Country Club. They asked Lisa to come by at 7 p.m. to watch Daniel until they returned around 11. 6:48 p.m., Jim called Lisa from the kitchen phone to confirm she was on her way. She answered cheerfully and said she'd be there in a few minutes. 7:02 p.m., a neighbor, Mrs. Klein, saw Lisa walk into the driveway with a small tote bag over her shoulder. She waved. Lisa waved back. Nothing seemed out of place. 7:08 p.m., Jim and Carol left the house, leaving Lisa with Daniel in the living room. Daniel was playing with wooden blocks. Lisa had a paperback novel tucked under her arm. From this point, the night should have been uneventful. Dinner, bedtime, a few hours of quiet reading, then the Harpers returned. It wasn't. Across the street, another neighbor, Harold West, sat watching TV in his front room during a commercial break. He thought he heard a door slam, loud, sharp. He glanced toward the Harper house, but saw nothing unusual. It was a summer night. People came and went. He thought nothing of it. No one else reported seeing or hearing anything at that time. When Jim and Carol pulled into their driveway, the house was dark except for the porch light. Inside, they found Daniel asleep in his crib, but Lisa was nowhere to be found. Her tote bag sat unopened by the couch. Her shoes were neatly placed beside it. On the coffee table, a paperback novel lay face down, as though she'd been reading it moments before. A glass of water had been knocked over, dripping onto the carpet. The back door was unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. It was as if Lisa had simply walked out. Jim and Carol called the police immediately. Officers arrived at 11:34 p.m. They searched the house, the yard, and both ends of the street. Search dogs were brought in within an hour. The dogs followed Lisa's scent from the living room, out the back door, down the driveway, and lost it just past the curb. Detectives questioned the Harpers for hours. Nothing in their statements suggested they knew what had happened to Lisa. They were genuinely shaken, not just for Lisa, but for their son. Lisa Crane was 5 feet 6 inches, 120 pounds, wearing a light blue t-shirt and jeans. She had been carrying no money, no keys, no change of clothes. Her purse still contained her wallet, her house keys, and a half-finished stick of gum. Friends describe her as shy but friendly, not the type to disappear voluntarily. She had no boyfriend anyone knew about, and no history of running away. In a small town, bad news travels fast, and speculation travels even faster. Some whispered that Lisa might have had a secret relationship. Others suggested she could have been lured outside by someone she knew and trusted. The police entertained every theory, but found no physical evidence to point toward an abduction, a runaway, or anything else. Daniel, at 3 years old, was the only person in the house during the disappearance. Detectives tried to ask him what happened, but his vocabulary was too limited. He said things like Lisa gone and door boom, but nothing that could be interpreted as reliable testimony. One odd detail did surface. A few days later, Daniel was seen drawing on a piece of paper. His parents kept the picture. 2 stick figures, a red square, and a tall black shape in the corner. They assumed it was a monster from one of the storybooks. The drawing was placed in a box of keepsakes and forgotten. At the time, no one thought a toddler's drawing could be evidence. But in this case, it was the only thing that ever saw what happened to Lisa Crane. In missing person cases, detectives often say the first 72 hours are the most critical. After that, leads dry up, memories fade, and the trail begins to go cold. For Lisa Crane, those first 72 hours were both intense and frustrating. Brookdale police set up a temporary command post in the Harper's living room. A dozen officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen Lisa between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. 2 neighbors recalled hearing a loud door slam, one at 9:12 p.m., another sometime after 9. Neither saw anyone come or go. No one reported a scream, a struggle, or unusual activity. It was as if Lisa had simply stepped outside and vanished. By the second day, over 50 volunteers joined the search, combing through wooded areas, abandoned barns, and drainage ditches within a 3-mile radius. Helicopters from a county sheriff's department swept the surrounding fields. Nothing. No clothing, no personal items, no signs of a struggle. Detectives re-interviewed Jim and Carol Harper. Their alibi, dinner party, checked out. Several attendees confirmed they were there from 7:30 p.m. until just before 11. Friends described Lisa as responsible and cautious. She had no history of skipping out on babysitting jobs, and no reason to leave Daniel alone. Police did note one curious thing. Lisa's last diary entry, dated the morning of August 11th, read simply, "Babysitting tonight. Hope it's quiet." Nothing unusual. Brookdale PD looked at several potential suspects. A former classmate of Lisa's who had once asked her out and been rejected. He had no alibi for that night, but denied involvement. A search of his home revealed nothing suspicious. A delivery driver who was making evening rounds in the area. His delivery logs confirmed he was on another street at 9 p.m., a neighbor 2 doors down, a man in his late 40s living alone. He told police he was watching TV all night and had not seen Lisa. No search warrant was issued at the time due to lack of probable cause. No fingerprints other than the Harpers, Lisa's, and Daniel's were found in the house. No tire tracks or footprints were visible outside. Lisa's purse, containing her wallet and house keys, was still in the living room, suggesting she hadn't planned to go anywhere. The overturned glass of water on the coffee table remained one of the few unexplained details. Police couldn't determine if it was knocked over accidentally or during a struggle. By the end of the first week, local media had picked up the story. Lisa's school photo appeared on the front page of the Brookdale Gazette under the headline, "Teen Babysitter Missing. No Leads in Search." Her disappearance rattled the community. Parents began locking doors. Children were no longer allowed to walk alone after dark. But as the weeks passed, coverage slowed. No new leads meant no new headlines. Detectives tried repeatedly to get information from Daniel, but at 3 years old, he couldn't form a coherent account. When asked what happened to Lisa, he would sometimes shrug, sometimes say Lisa gone, and once say man here, but nothing consistent enough to use. When shown a photo of Lisa, he smiled. When shown a photo lineup of a local man, he lost interest quickly and returned his toys. The drawing he made days later, the one with a red square and black figure, was mentioned in passing in an officer's notes but not treated as evidence. By early 1985, the investigation had stalled. The case was officially classified as a missing person under suspicious circumstances, but with no witnesses, no physical evidence, and no clear suspect, there was little more police could do. Lisa's family continued to search on their own, posting flyers in surrounding towns, contacting private investigators, and following up on every rumor, no matter how far-fetched. Nothing panned out. In 1988, Lisa's file was moved to the Brookdale Police Department's inactive drawer. In 1994, a statewide cold case review briefly revisited her disappearance. One detective suggested interviewing the neighbor 2 doors down again, but the man had since moved to another state, and no follow-up was conducted. By 2004, 20 years after Lisa Crane vanished, the file was faded, the evidence box dusty. The only remaining physical items were Lisa's purse, her paperback novel, a set of photos from the Harper house taken the night she disappeared, and buried in the back, the officer's handwritten note mentioning drawing made by child. For 2 decades, Lisa Crane's disappearance was a closed door, but that drawing, the one no one thought mattered, was still there waiting. And when the boy who made it grew up, he realized what he'd actually seen. 20 years had passed since Lisa Crane disappeared from a Harper home. The quiet town of Brookdale had changed. New families had moved in. Children had grown up, and the events of August 1984 had faded into local history. For Daniel Harper, now 23 years old, the case was personal in a way most people couldn't understand. He had no clear memory of Lisa's disappearance, only fragments like flashes in a dream. A sound here, a shadow there. Both of his parents had passed away within a year of each other. His father from a heart attack, his mother from a sudden illness. Sorting through their belongings was a slow, emotional process. Boxes from the attic were stacked in the living room of the house where he'd grown up. One late summer evening, Daniel opened a box labeled in his mother's handwriting. Danny, school and childhood. Inside were report cards, crayon scribbles, and photographs from birthday parties. At the bottom was a sheet of yellow construction paper, edges curled and brittle. The drawing was simple, childlike, made with thick crayon strokes. 2 stick figures, one smaller, one taller. A red square on the right side of the page. And in the top left corner, a tall black figure with a white oval near the top. Daniel stared at it. He couldn't remember making it, but he recognized the date written in faint pencil on the back, August 14, 1984. Just 3 days after Lisa vanished. Holding the drawing seemed to stir something in him. He remembered sitting at a low table, gripping a crayon, his mother leaning over him, telling him to draw what you saw. At the time, he didn't understand why she'd asked. He remembered thinking the black figure was frightening, but not knowing the word for scary. Daniel's heart pounded as he realized this wasn't a random picture. This was the only account he had ever given of that night. He studied the black figure again. The white oval could have been a poorly drawn face, but it looked too smooth, too uniform. It hit him. It wasn't a face. It was a mask, a ski mask. The red square puzzled him until he remembered the houses on Hawthorne Drive back in the 1980s. 2 doors down from the Harper's home had been a shed, painted a deep, chipped red. He'd played near it once as a child. The shed belonged to a man named Warren Cole, a quiet, solitary figure in his late 40s who kept to himself. Cole had moved away in the early 1990s, and Daniel hadn't thought of him in years. Daniel took the drawing to the Brookdale Police Department. At first, the desk officer on duty looked skeptical. It was, after all, a crayon drawing from a toddler, 2 decades old. But when Daniel explained the date, the context, and his suspicion about the red shed and the masked figure, the tone shifted. Detective Laura Hensley, head of the department's cold case unit, agreed to review the file. When she pulled Lisa's case box from the storage, there was the original officer's note. Child drew picture figures, red square, dark shape, possibly unrelated. It had been dismissed as meaningless. Hensley compared the drawing to archived aerial photos of the neighborhood from the 1980s. The red shed was clearly visible 2 doors down, behind Warren Cole's house. Cole had been interviewed once in 1984, but never searched. At the time, police had no probable cause, and Cole claimed he'd been home all night, watching television. Now, with fresh eyes, Hensley saw a different picture. A teenager disappears from inside a locked house. A toddler says nothing, but draws a masked figure in a red building. The building matches a real location, in direct line of sight, from the Harper's back door. Hensley's team ran a background check. Warren Cole had a prior conviction for assaulting a young woman in the late 1970s. After moving out of Brookdale in 1991, he'd lived in 2 other states before dying in prison in 1998, serving time for another violent offense. When Hensley learned the shed behind his former house was still standing, now part of property owned by a distant relative, she made a call to arrange a search. For 20 years, Lisa's case had gone nowhere. A missing babysitter, no witnesses, no evidence, until the only eyewitness, a 3-year-old child, spoke again, not with words, but with crayons. It had been 36 years since Emily Carter vanished from the Miller home. 36 years since baby Jason's drawing was tucked into an evidence file and forgotten. But now, detectives were standing in front of a sagging, weather-stained shed on the edge of a rural property, a place that didn't exist on any map in 1984. The air was heavy, not just with the scent of mildew and dust, but with the weight of what could be inside. When we got the tip, I didn't think much of it. People confess to knowing something about the Carter case every few years. But this man, he described something no one outside the original investigation knew. The tip came from a terminally ill man in his late 60s. He contacted police from a hospice bed, claiming he knew where the babysitter was put. His exact words. When asked how he knew, his voice cracked. Because I built the place that hid her. Detectives traced the man's property records. Sure enough, in 1984, he'd done contract work for a man named Daniel Crow, a reclusive neighbor who had lived less than half a mile from the Miller home. Crow had died in 2003. His property was now abandoned, and in the corner of the overgrown lot was the shed. The door was padlocked, rusted to the hasp. A crime scene tech worked the shackle until it gave a metallic snap. The hinges shrieked as the door swung open, a sound that seemed to echo through the decades. Inside, stale air, darkness, and the faintest trace of something sweet and rotten at the same time. At first glance, the shed looked empty. Just dust, cobwebs, and a skeletal frame of old furniture. But the floor wasn't right. Detectives noticed it immediately. A patch of newer would set into the otherwise rotting planks. The nails holding it down were clean. It was like someone had tried to make it blend in, but they did too good of a job. Fresh wood in a 30-year-old shed? That's not camouflage. That's a flag. They pried the boards up. Underneath was a narrow cavity lined with plastic sheeting. And inside, a small collection of items wrapped in a disintegrating quilt. The first bundle, a faded denim jacket the right size for a 17-year-old girl. The second, a silver locket with the initials EC engraved on the back. The third, a human jawbone, still with 2 intact teeth. Forensics confirmed what the investigators already knew in their bones. The remains belonged to Emily Carter. But there was one more thing in that cavity, an old Polaroid photograph. It showed Emily sitting on a couch, holding Jason in her lap, smiling at the camera. Only the background didn't match the Miller living room. The photo's wallpaper, mustard yellow with a distinctive floral pattern, was the same design on the walls inside Daniel Crow's house in 1984. The realization hit the task force like a hammer. Emily had been taken alive from the Miller home, and she had been kept, at least for a time, just down the road. The break was seismic. After decades of dead ends, the Carter case wasn't just about a disappearance anymore. It was about captivity, secrets, and neighbors would see nothing or said nothing. And the key to it all had been there from the start, in the hands of a 3-year-old boy. The photograph sat on the table between Detective Armitage and forensic artist Claire Rennick. It was Jason's drawing, now laminated for preservation. Time had faded the crayon lines slightly, but the shapes were still there, stubbornly holding their secrets. Claire leaned forward, tracing the blunt green strokes with a gloved finger. "This isn't just a tree," she murmured. "It's a structure behind the tree. And here, these aren't random shapes. They're slats, like a vent." Armitage had looked at the drawing 100 times over the years. He had memorized every jagged line, every strange curve. But now, with the shed fresh in his mind, it clicked. Those green branches weren't branches. They were the overhanging limbs that partially hid the shed from view. Those slats were the warped wooden panels along the shed side. And the strange yellow square in the upper corner, that wasn't the sun. It was a rusted floodlight above the shed's door, the one they'd just seen still bolted in place. They pulled the property records. Crow's house, even back in 1984, had sat on a plot ringed with trees. The shed had been there since 1979. Jason's perspective in the drawing matched exactly the line of sight from the upstairs window of Crow's house, where he would have been if his babysitter was taken outside. The question that now turned everyone's stomach. Had Jason seen something through that window the night Amber disappeared? They found him in another state, living quietly with a wife and 2 young kids of his own. He didn't remember much. Memories from that age are fractured, blurred by time. But when they showed him the drawing, something in his face shifted. His eyes tightened, his jaw clenched. "I used to have nightmares," he said slowly, "about someone carrying her, and that light, it was in the dream, always that yellow light." His hands trembled as he explained that in the dream, the light flicked on for just a second, then darkness again. And he'd hear Amber's voice, not screaming, just saying something softly, like she was trying to calm someone down. He never told anyone, not his parents, not the police. It didn't feel real at the time, just a scary dream. With the shed, the light, and Jason's testimony, however fractured, they finally had enough to tie the location to the abduction. Crime scene text dug deeper. Behind the shed's wall, wedged between rotting boards, they found something wrapped in oilcloth. It was a hairbrush, faded blue plastic, with several long strands of hair still clinging to it. DNA confirmed it was Amber's. The crayon drawing had led them to the exact place she'd been taken, and where Crow had hidden the first physical evidence in decades. In the war room, the investigative team pinned Jason's drawing beside the new crime scene photos. The resemblance was uncanny, even down to the angle of the shed's vent and the arc of the tree limbs. What had once been dismissed as a child's scribble had turned out to be a witness statement frozen in time. The mood in the room shifted. After years of dead ends, they weren't just chasing a ghost anymore. They had a map. One drawn in wax crayon by a boy who couldn't speak the night his babysitter vanished. Courtroom, 2008. The same town that once whispered about the girl who vanished in the night is now packed shoulder to shoulder with locals, reporters, and old friends of the Collins family. Everyone is here to see the man who has been a shadow in their community for over 2 decades, Richard Crow, finally face judgment. The prosecution lays out the evidence like a scalpel across the jury's nerves. The shed on Crow's property, concealed for years behind overgrown brush, matching Jason's decades-old drawing in eerie detail. Forensic hits on small bone fragments recovered from beneath the rotted floorboards, DNA matching Angela Collins, fibers and hair consistent with the clothing Angela wore that night. And perhaps most damning, the testimony of witnesses who'd kept silent out of fear. Neighbors who saw Crow pacing in the early hours of May 12, 1984, dirt under his fingernails, a cigarette shaking between his fingers. Crow, once a looming figure in the neighborhood, sits in a rumpled gray suit. His expression is flat, eyes shifting only when Jason's drawing, the crayon scribbled map of that shed, is displayed on a courtroom screen. Jason doesn't attend the trial. Now in his late 20s, living 3 states away, he tells the DA in a quiet phone call, "I don't want to see him. I want to remember her as she was." The verdict comes quickly. Guilty of first-degree murder. The judge's words are sharp, deliberate. You not only took a young woman's life, but you took the safety from a child's home, the peace from a family, and the truth from an entire community. Crow is sentenced to life without parole. He shows no emotion as deputies lead him away. For Angela's parents, the victory is bittersweet. Her father tells a local paper, justice came too late to save her, but it came. That's what matters. Her mother's voice cracks on camera. "I used to hate the drawing. I thought it was just the scribbles of a confused boy. Now it's the reason we have answers." Jason never knew the role he played until detectives called him during a renewed investigation. They told him that his memory, trapped in a child's scrawl, had been the thread that finally unraveled the truth. "I didn't draw a clue," he says in a rare interview. "I drew what scared me, and I guess fear remembers." The documentary closes with an overhead shot of Crow's property, the shed now demolished, the ground beneath it bare. The narrator's voice is measured but heavy. In 1984, a babysitter disappeared, and a little boy was left with only a picture in his mind. It would take 24 years for that picture to be seen for what it really was. Not art, but evidence. Angela's grave rests in the small town cemetery, fresh flowers marking the stone. Jason's words linger in the air. People think memories fade, but sometimes they're just waiting to be found.